I have told this story exactly once before, to a chaplain who didn't believe a word of it, and I told him I didn't care whether he believed it. I was there, that's enough for me. We found the cairnwake on a routine sweep, out past the Ashfold Reach where the old war used to be fought. She came up on sensors as a debris field first, then as a shape, then as a ship. 3 kilometers of dead hull, hanging in the dark the way a body hangs in water, patient and unbothered by gravity. No power, no heat signature, no distress call, though the log buoy still spun on its axis, dumb and blind, the way it had spun for 300 years. I wasn't there to think. I was there to walk point for the salvage crew, and make sure nothing on that ship decided to wake up angry. That was the job. I'd done worse jobs for less pay. The tow-in took the better part of a day. Nobody talked much on the shuttle over. You don't. Going into something that size and that quiet. I'd served on ships that size once, full of men and running engines and the ordinary racket of a crew that hadn't slept enough. A dead one is a different animal. She didn't look wrecked. No hull breach, no scoring from weapons fire, no sign of the war that had put her out here. She looked like a ship that had simply been told to stop, and had done it, and had been waiting ever since for someone to tell her otherwise. The cairnwake had been a tribunal ship, one of the last of the old Kest circuit, the authority that used to ride the war zones back before anyone alive today was born, passing judgment on things too big for any one side to judge alone. Desertion, massacre, broken truces. The circuit didn't take sides. That was the whole point of it, and it was also why nobody much liked it, and why nobody was surprised when it finally went dark along with everything else in that war. We moved through her in pressure suits, boots ringing dull on decking that hadn't felt weight in longer than my grandfather had been alive, frost bearded every seam. In the wardroom, someone had left a cup sitting on a table, and it was still sitting there, 300 years later, waiting for a hand that was never coming back for it. The engineer on our crew, a woman named Aldous Rain, had the deck plans memorized before we ever cut the airlock, and she led us down through 4 decks of silence to a chamber sealed behind a door that our best cutting tools wouldn't touch. Kest tribunal ships always had one, a judgment chamber they called it, though nobody left alive really knew what happened in there. Aldous had tried 3 different override keys on the door and gotten nothing back but a long, patient refusal, the kind that isn't stubbornness so much as certainty. The door simply did not consider us relevant. 2 centuries of salvage crews have tried this door, she said, not looking at me. Nobody's gotten it open. So why are we trying again? Because eventually somebody does. She wasn't wrong twice in her life, that I ever heard, and she wasn't wrong that time either. On her 4th key the door didn't open so much as it simply stopped disagreeing, and we went in. The chamber was round, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. At its center stood a single altar, waist height, carved from some pale stone that didn't belong to any world I'd ever set foot on. And lying flat across it was a blade, long, unadorned, the length of a man's outstretched arm, its edge so clean it looked less like metal than like a line someone had drawn across the dark. There was no dust on it. 3 centuries, and there was no dust on it. Aldous's team wanted samples. Metallurgy, they said. Provenance, museum value. Words people use when they've decided a thing is dead and are only arguing about what it's worth. I wasn't there for any of that. I was there to make sure nothing woke up angry, and so I was the one standing closest when the youngest tech on the crew, a kid named Otto who'd never seen action in his life, reached out to steady himself against the altar, and instead put his bare glove flat against the blade. Nothing happened. Not to him. The room went from silent to listening. I felt it before I understood it. A change in the air, a pressure behind the eyes, like a held breath. Aldous stepped back. Otto pulled his hand away fast, the way you do when you've touched something and some animal part of you knows, before your mind catches up, that you shouldn't have. And in the quiet after, I did the thing I've asked myself 100 times since why I did. I stepped forward, and I put my own hand on the blade. I've turned that moment over more times than I've turned over anything in my life, and the plainest answer I have is that somebody needed to. And Otto had gone white as the stone, and it felt, God help me, like a job. The metal was warm, not machine warm, warm like something that had been waiting, and had just now stopped. Light climbed the blade from my palm outward, pale and clean, the color of a winter sky at first light, not the cyan of a war machine, not the gold of a throne. Something else, something that didn't flare so much as it settled, the way a scale settles once the last weight's been placed. It ran to the tip and back, and glyphs I'd never noticed etched into the stone of the altar caught the same light and held it, and I understood, standing there with my hand not moving because I couldn't have made it move, that the ship was not scanning my rank, or my service record, or my name. It was reading a night 9 years gone, that I had never once put in any report. We'd been pulling out of a border post that was already lost, shooting our own retreat cover, and a scout from the other side had come up out of the smoke with his hands empty and his rifle slung, and nothing on his face but the plain animal fact of being 20 years old and done fighting. My orders were clear. Nobody was taking prisoners that night. There wasn't time and there wasn't room, and the man giving those orders was not wrong about the math of it. I let the scout run anyway. I never told anyone. I've never been sure, in 9 years, whether it was the right call or only the human one. I only knew I couldn't do the other thing and still be able to look at my own hands afterward. Standing in that cold round room, 300 years and a dead war away from that night, I understood that the blade had found the one thing about me that had never gone into any file, the one decision I'd never once tried to justify to anybody, and it had decided that was the whole of what it needed to know. The voice, when it came, wasn't a voice so much as a certainty arriving in my chest, worded, the way you sometimes know what a friend is about to say before he says it, 4 words, nothing more. Justice answers to you, bearer. The light didn't die down after that. It settled into the blade the way a coal settles into a hearth, banked and patient and no longer sleeping. Around me, Aldous and her crew stood very still, the way you stand in the presence of something you weren't equipped to expect, and nobody spoke, and I did not take my hand away. I didn't feel powerful. I want to be plain about that, in case anyone reading this expects a different kind of story. I felt exactly the way I'd felt 9 years ago in the smoke, with a rifle in my hands and a choice in front of me that no order was going to make for me. Older, steadier, recognized, not rewarded. I carried the adjudicator off that ship myself, and I have carried it every day since, and I have never once drawn it in anger. That was never what it was for. Aldous asked me once, over cold coffee in a station canteen, whether I regretted putting my hand where Otto's had already flinched away from. I told her the truth. I hadn't been thinking about regret at all. I'd been thinking that somebody had to, and that I was already standing closest, and that the not thinking had turned out to be the most honest thing about me. The Kest circuit is 300 years gone, and most days the blade sits wrapped in cloth in a footlocker and I forget it's there at all, the way you forget a scar once it's old enough. I take it out on the anniversary of that night in the smoke, and it never lights for me twice the way it lit that once. It doesn't need to. It made its judgment on a scout's face, on a rifle I didn't raise, years before it ever had a name for it. The blade only came to confirm what had already been decided in the dark. It was built by people who understood, better than most of us ever will, that judgment isn't a thing you're handed. It's a thing that finds you, usually on the worst night of your life, in the moment you choose to be more than the orders you were given. And it waits, sometimes for centuries, for someone willing to be found.